Advisor's ready.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was asked to give a summary of House Bill 2302 and the differences between the House and the Senate version. You should see the comparison chart for this bill in front of you. So starting, kind of take it chunk by chunk. The Senate version for reservoir debt payments. The Senate appropriated $52 million from the State General Fund to a water supply storage debt payment account. This money would be invested in treasury bills, but if the director of the Kansas Water Office calls the debt into service, the State Finance Council shall authorize the state treasurer to immediately expend the account for debt payments. That account would also be reappropriated. That's appropriated for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. So the House version would require the Kansas Water Office to expend at least $15 million from the State Water Plan Fund in fiscal year 24, 25, and 26 to retire debt associated with Milford and Perry Lake reservoirs. I think I misspoke on the Senate version too. That would start in fiscal year 23 and be reappropriated for fiscal year 24. Apologize. Okay, going on to funding the State Water Plan Fund. The House version had a sales tax distribution equaling 1.231% of sales tax revenue to be deposited into the State Water Plan Fund between July 1, 23 and July 1, 28. The House version also paused other statutory transfers in totaling $8 million. And then the House, for the trigger for transfers made to new funds, the full amount of sales tax would need to be distributed into the State Water Plan Fund in order for those transfers to be made. The Senate version would provide a $35 million transfer on July 1, 23 from the State General Fund to the State Water Plan Fund. It also includes legislative intent to provide that same $35 million transfer from SGF each year through June 30th, 2028. The Senate version would continue those $8 million in statutory transfers. And from the State Water Plan Fund, the Senate version would require $1 million in fees that are current fees, water protection fees for stock watering. Those would need to be used for stock watering conservation projects. Some similar parts of the bill, Kansas Water Authority can recommend certain up to 10% of unencumbered State Water Plan Fund balances for use for salaries to implement the State Water Plan. And finally, the sunset is the same on both. On July 1, 28, the new funds, the Water Technical Assistance Fund and the Water Projects Grant Fund, which both have demand transfers for each year of the plan. Those would sunset on July 1, 28, and all funds would go back to the State Water Plan Fund. Moving on, I kind of mentioned the stock watering projects already, but yeah, those water protection fees for stock watering would be prioritized for stock watering conservation projects, and the type of scope would be identified by the Kansas Water Office as part of the State Water Plan. Going on to unincorporated areas, the Senate version would allow unincorporated areas with a national park site or state historic site to apply for grants from the Water Technical Assistance Fund. The House version did not include that. Going on, just to describe the Water Technical Assistance Fund, that establishes a fund to provide grants for the planning, engineering, management, and other technical assistance for water infrastructure projects or processing loan or grant applications for those projects. Both versions would allow any municipality or special district related to water to apply for those grants. And then another difference in the fund, The House version had a cap of $15 million, and any excess amount that's transferred into the fund beyond that cap could be used for other state water plan fund purposes. When the Senate version has the same cap of $15 million, but any excess amount beyond that would then be transferred back to SGF. Moving on to, I guess, other parts of the Water Technical Assistance Fund. Kansas Water Office would establish rules and regs for criteria for that fund. It's the same in both. And then no single grant may be greater than $1 million. Again, the same on both. Going to Section 5 of the Water Projects Grant Fund. This fund would establish a fund to provide for grants to municipalities or special districts related to water for water infrastructure projects, matching monies for grant or loan applications for infrastructure projects, or grants for an outstanding loan balance from the Public Water Supply Loan Fund or the Kansas Pollution Control Revolving Fund. Difference in this section, again, the cap on the fund, the House version had a cap of $45 million with any excess amount to be used for state water plan fund purposes. The Senate version had a cap of $30 million with any excess amount transferred back to SGF. Same on both. No single grant can be greater than $8 million. And again, Kansas Water Office would establish rules and regulations for the fund. Finally, just another difference would be the effective date. The House version was effective July 1, 2023. The Senate version, because the appropriations would start in this fiscal year, the effective date was Kansas Register. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any further questions on the bill.
Any questions?
Thank you. One clarification on the stock watering conservation projects. On this says on the Senate version, it requires that they be used for stock watering, and when you explained it, you said it would prioritize.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the language in the bill is actually for fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 28, priority for use of funds collected pursuant to KSA 82A 954A3. That's the stock watering fee. That's remitted to the State Water Plan Fund shall be for stock watering conservation projects. And the type of scope shall be identified by the Kansas Water Office. So it's a shall.
I had a question on that too. I think the annual fee collection amount is closer to $400,000 to $500,000, so that would be more than the annual collection. So I'm just wondering how that would work.
It would be whatever the fee amount is collected. That's how it's written in statute. So I don't know if they'll actually equal out $1 million, but it's whatever fees are collected under that statute shall be used for stock watering conservation projects.
Number we've been using is 500,000.
Well, yeah, that's a very good ballpark number.
Do we need to adjust this figure then or not? I don't know. I'm asking.
Revisor, is that written such that whatever amount comes in is what's distributed? Or is it, say, exactly $1 million per year?
It's whatever amount is distributed. So sorry, the comparison charts might be off on the figures there. How it's written is any fees that are collected pursuant to the stock watering water protection fee shall be used for stock watering conservation projects. Anything that is collected and remitted to the State Water Plan Fund.
I think one of our biggest discussions to start with here is how we're going to fund this with sales tax or with the state general fund. So I'm just asking for your comments on how you felt. As we were putting the bill together, we relied on the 2016 Blue Ribbon Task Force, which suggested a sales tax carve-off because it might be a little bit more stable to the Kansas Water Office and less chance of it being swept by the legislature. But up here, I realize anything can be swept at any time. So that was part of our logic behind it, and would be happy to listen to your opinions on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we want to talk about the lake debt, or do we want to start on that one first? I want to make sure. That's kind of step 2 or step 1.
Do you have any problem with their lake debt?
I'd make a comment.
Okay.
I am happy to take a compromise position. I think I just want to make a comment that I think, in my opinion, it would be really prudent to just pay off the debt now. That would be my ultimate preference. I realize that might not be what the committee compromise or the conference committee compromises on. I do think it's really important to have control of this storage, and I'm worried, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with interest rates, so we could earn up to $1 million by putting this into arbitrage, but it wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed. And so it's kind of, for me, weighing the cost and benefit of, is it more beneficial to try and make some money off of it, even though we may not know how much money that is, or in a time of severe drought, do we want to have control of the water and know that we can rely on that if we need to? So, and that's not to, I think it's smart when we can, as a government, to make money where we can, or to make good investments where we can make them. With this particular item, though, I feel strongly that I would like to pay it off this year if we could.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative, for your thoughts on that. I would say the payoff, a couple things. One, is in the governor's budget. 2, we have the money this year to do this. The reason for doing the Treasury bill route, Treasury rates went at 4.9 yesterday at auction on 6 months. So when I played with the numbers on that for the $1 million, is at 4.85. So we know for the first 6 months, we're going to win the game. This thing is written so carefully in the proviso because we are concerned about, if we have a drought, how we get out of that. So in order to control that, you have to have that paid off. So in that proviso, it's got wording in there that tells us exactly how to do that as quick as we can. If we take the House side of this thing, you guys don't pay this off for 3 years, and if we have a drought in the first year or 2, that could be an issue. So we got the money to do that. The other thing that I would add to that is that I want somebody to review the Corps of Engineer note, because I think there's some possibilities of some renegotiations in that. And by doing it this way, we haven't paid anything down on it in case we can work something out. So that's kind of the reason why we would be doing it this way and setting it up. And we visit with the Water Office, the State Treasurer. We would try to get everything covered we could think of in this plan. So that's,
Can we take them both? That's the joke.
sure. Sure.
Since you're the money man here, you're the banker guy, how quickly, if we needed to put that water into use, in a bad year, how quickly could we disengage from out of the investment and get it paid off so we could do what we wanted to do?
If we take the House side, we got a problem because it's 3 years paying. So we're on the Senate side, and that goes before, we did it as quick as we could do it. So I think it's like the State Finance Council calls a meeting. The water office would say, we got a problem, would go to them. And as soon as that comes out, the state treasurer would be directed to sell the treasuries and get out of them. And they should be very marketable. So
So,
I don't know whether it's a 2-month or a month.
okay,
I would think how many people's on that group and calling a meeting is how quick that would happen.
okay, thank you.
I'll just make a couple of comments. I understand the arbitrage and the thought of hopefully renegotiating on, and they're actually kind of a Corps of Engineer contract that was written many, many years ago on compound interest. And if we can pay them off soon, we're gonna save at least 10 million on what it might have been if we went to the full maturity on this contract. So, but I think it's sure worth talking about to do the arbitrage as the senator suggested here, but we can move forward.
Mr. Chairman, I might put on that too, that when we look at that debt, it started out with like, one of them was 7 million, the other one was 8 million. Now we're up to 51,800,000. So think how much interest is involved in this. We've been kicking this can down the road for a long time. It's time to pick it up. So.
Okay, if I look at it, our next issue might be sales and compensating use tax funded or through the state general fund. Sure, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I sat down with this kind of plan, we was trying to mirror the kind of money you guys are wanting to do. So if you really sit down and play with the 5 years and go down through this, we are front-end loaded. So we're putting, thank you, we're putting $87 million in this thing right up front. That 52 would happen before July 1, and the 35 would happen right after the July 1. So they would have the money, not waiting for sales tax money. This would be money they've got. The other part is, when you sit down, we put the intent in there for the 35 million. And you say, well, you know, they'll change their mind down the road. I think of it positively, because I think we will do such a good job with this program. That makes it very flexible for us to go up in budgets with their needs. So instead of being negative on this, I'm positive. We can't do, you get into flexibility of doing this, you get into fiscal responsibility, and those kind of things kind of fit into what we're trying to do this. And I think we sit here at this table trying to do the best we can with what we have to work with at this point. And like Representative Minnick says, these things can be changed down the road, you know, with what goes on both proposals. So that's kind of where I come from, and we was like at 3.5. The other thing I would ask the House side on this is that if you're paying $15 million a year on that debt, that's $45 million. When are we going to pay the other $6 million? Because the payoff's $51,800,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments. I think I really appreciate the desire to do this in an economically smart way. And I think the reason that we were really drawn to the sales tax carve-off was in part because we have the 8 million of statutory demand transfers in statute right now. And I think that's been in place since the 91, the early 90s. And we've seen a chronic underfunding of that 8 million in that time period. And this is, of course, it's 5 years to start, so it's a smaller time period. And there seems to be a real commitment right now to get it funded. But I think that's maybe ultimately my concern is that with $8 million, the past legislature set this great goal of funding that every single year, and then it wasn't fully funded, or it stopped being fully funded in 2008, I believe, and then was not fully funded again until last year. So I think the amount of money that didn't go to that program was fairly significant, and part of that is because it's easier to sweep. Obviously, a sales tax carve-off, it would still have the ability to be swept, but by creating that dedicated mechanism, I think it would make it a little bit harder, and it would increase the level of commitment from the legislature to ensure that those funds were transferred. So that's, kind of my personal reasoning on why I like that mechanism. And with the Blue Ribbon Task Force, that was a large group of stakeholders that came together in 2017 and felt that that was a really great model for how to fund water resources. It was modeled after Missouri, who did their 0.1% sales tax carve-off, and theirs is actually constitutional, and they vote on it every 10 years. But they've seen a lot of success with their program doing that for water parks and recreation. So I think that was kind of the background and why we felt it was really important to have a dedicated mechanism. And then on the, depending on where we land, if SGF is what the group decides they want to move forward with, my one concern would be, I know in the first year with that $52,000 payoff of buying those treasury bonds, that takes it to 87 million. But then after that point, the total amount of transfer would be less than what we would be asking for in the sales tax carve-off. So if we did go that route, I would be interested in seeing more in the SGF transfer ideally exceed what would be in the carve-off. So I guess all that to say, I'm still in favor of the carve-off. That would be my preference. But if it's the will of the group to go a different direction, then I would like to see more money transferred to SGF.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my concerns, I echo Representative Vaughn. We have, since 1991, the $8 million that has been demand transfer has only been funded 8 years out of 32. So only 8 years out of 32 have we actually fully given the $8 million. But I would say that that's not even fully funding water. We call it fully funding, but that's not fully funding water. It's supposed to be 28 million. If you take 28 million over the last 32 years, that's $896 million that we should have been investing in water that we haven't. And so I think a dedicated fund with the sales tax is important so that it is less likely it is dedicated to the water plan. We have to make this a priority. We've gone, I think it was you that said we swept it, you kicked the can down the road too long. We need to stop this. And the best way, I believe, is with the sales tax carve out. But it needs to be a lot of money, in my opinion. So, because 896, and that doesn't even include inflation. If I added inflation in there, we'd be well over $1 billion, so.
I'm loving this discussion. Honestly, personally, I don't care which way we fund it as long as it gets done and it's enough money. Whichever one is the most secure would clearly be the way to go. The catch is that it might not get across the Senate. And if we don't get it passed, ouch, right? So, and I agree that the 35 million is probably not the right number. It needs to be noticeably more than that. I keep going to this chart that shows one version of the expenditures and what we actually need, and there's a whole lot of white space in between there on this chart. And just to do a relatively minimal job, frankly, not a Cadillac job version. So I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, I know, but that's where I see it.
Very much. I really enjoy the debate we're having today and the topic we're talking about and the concern all you folks have. and the dedication you had to this project. And I was thinking back, I was around in 2017 when they attempted that, because we never did fund anything. So I think that was, if we still had a local sales tax, even if we had it, they still didn't get any money. They could, 8 million or 6 million was the most we ever could crank out for state water plant fund. And that's under a sales tax plan. So raising the sales tax wouldn't do it either, so, because you don't have any money. So, I mean, I could live with that. I like the idea of the local sales tax and the things that guarantee, but I think Senator Fagg's idea on the future might be the way to go. I mean, either one I could pick, but I would, right now, I'd vote with Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things I might add to this. Thinking positive in her graph she shows over there, we're both short on where we should be. This makes it more flexible for us to do the right thing in the future by this. The thing concerns me is on the sales tax too. We got people wanting to cut sales tax here and cut it there, and what does that do to that number? At least we know 35 million's there. We know exactly where we're going to start with. I would envision a budget coming next year that would be something higher and be able to justify it. You know, that's kind of where I'm thinking on a couple of those areas. Thank you.
One quick question. How often do we come back the next year and actually add money to a project? I don't see it happening very often, and that part concerns me.
Thank you. It's a 5 year, so this would be 4 or 5 years that it would be hopefully dedicated. If we did the SGF or whatever we do, it needs to be a commitment on all of our parts to keep our colleagues and, accountable, and just keep bringing this up, that it is important to continue to fund this and to protect that funding. But it would be for 5 years if whatever we decide on here, so that's a good thing. And then we show, the water office can show us how they're going to use the funds and make sure that there's transparent accountability in that as well, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as you think of this front-end loading, $87 million, we're making a big commitment to that. And when you take that $35 million and say, well, where are we at 3 years into this deal, we're actually putting more money into this if we do the intent, because you're going to be paying off lake debt as we go along with this. Where you catch up in the 4th and 5th year. So something we might consider is try to put some intent that puts a little more money on the back end of this thing. Just a thought.
Thank you. So in my mind, the reservoir debt is separate from the water plan fund. So it's not that we're funding 87 million, that's a separate debt that we are required at some point to pay by a state. And so I don't want to lump all that in and say that we're giving them 87 million because they're separate things. Does that make sense? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I would add to that is that when you look at the 35 million, you're lumping your lake debt into the same side too, at 15 million a year. So that's right.
I guess I'd point out to everybody that when the House was first coming up with our side of things, that was back in early January after we'd had a few meetings and some of us got together and started putting 2302 together. We didn't receive the governor's budget until the 20-something of January, I think. And she had money in there for retirement of these 2 reservoirs, which we think is a good idea. We were up early on, trying to include it on our bill. I think it's good to put that money aside. It's a liability for the state of Kansas. We have a contract and we will have to pay it by 2032, part of it, and some of it by 2040, I believe. I think it's great to put this money aside, but I think we need to concentrate, and I don't personally have a problem with the arbitrage that you come up with. We'll discuss it more, but What I'm concerned about is the Kansas Water Office having sufficient funding to improve some programs, to invest in our future here in the state of Kansas on these water issues. We'd love to see some more people working at divisional water resources to be able to get, we need engineers and we need some other people, hydrologists to help with some of the services they provide to people here in the state of Kansas. If a feed yard out in my area sends in a plan developed by a state engineer or by a professional engineer, I'm sorry, the state engineer still has to review that. And some of those reviews are taking months and months to happen. And it's hard on our economy when we aren't staffed well enough at the state agencies to be able to provide those services to the people here in the state of Kansas. That's a little bit about what we're talking about. But a big portion of this bill also has to do with municipalities. We have a great window here that if we can have small municipals leverage some of this money, just same banking philosophy here. If they can leverage money into a good plan using state money and then go after some federal dollars from bill or an IRA to do construction or improvements on their water systems, whether it's storage or reducing lead pipes and all kinds of things, we think it's time to strike. And I'll be honest, the 35 million a year, if we go that route, is nowhere near enough. My numbers were far, far higher than that from a starting point. And so I'm kind of holding the reservoir deals an entirely separate issue also. It's something we need to do, and we have that legal requirement out there. But then the second issue is the water office, and that's the one I'm trying to concentrate on this portion of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Put that thing on. When you take your plan versus our plan, I'm saying we're not addressing that things the way we need to. In that first 3 years, if you net off that 15 million, our 35 is addressing that more than what you guys are. So if that's a problem, that's the area we need to be working on. The 35 million kind of was trying to mirror what you guys were trying to do, make a level. If we put the intent part on the backside of that to address that, what do we do as sales tax if you feel like we need more money? Because right now you say we don't have enough. How do we address that in the future? Is it easier to go through, show why we need it and get it into the budget, or are we going to mess with sales tax at the time people don't want to do that? So just a thought.
With the pay-go rules we have, it's very hard to add. And that's why at this point with the expected improvement or expansion of what we're asking for in water issues, the Kansas Water Authority gets $60 to $70 million in requests every year. And we've been trying to handle that with $22 million a year. In our surrounding states, I'm sure you saw the same states comparisons that we did. I think Kansas can step up and do a far better job. But I will tell you, in my personal opinion, the House version's a little bit on the light side also. I think we need to invest more than and we intentionally ratcheted down a 0.1% of sales tax to a 0.08%, 80% of what the Blue Ribbon Task Force asked for, but the compensating use tax has grown so much in the last several years. That was something they didn't anticipate being that high a level. Actually, 54.1 million per year is a good start. And I've said that many times. It's just a good start, and we need to look at it. It's going to be tough to raise it in the future. I realize that. And I think intelligent people in the legislature in the future will find a way around that and be able to increase that. If we're showing that we're making some good progress on things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I picked up something the other day that had 4 earmarkings on it. And this can get so complicated when you I'm just not a big person on earmarking. That's my opinion. That when we come in here to set budgets and you got your hands tied before you ever sit down with what the current issues are at that time, we need to be careful with that. So this is important, and we really appreciate all the work that the House has done on this. You've carried the water on this, and we want to work with you on this kind of thing. So hopefully, we've done our job very well, and the future will do their job very well.
Comments? We'd like to discuss things a little bit, and we might, yes, come back. I'm not sure what time it is, a little after 1. 1:10, seems like.
15 minutes.
Okay. Can we just step out and huddle, and you guys can huddle? Okay. The super secret room. Okay, we had several discussions out there, I guess, but you have a comment, Cindy?
So I would just like to say that I can agree on the reservoir position that the Senate has, but I don't like the insecurity that we have with the SGF. So I would just ask for 60 million, and we could do that SGF.
I would support that effort. I'm really tied to the sales tax carve off, but I think if this is the position of this group going forward, I can get behind the SGF, but I do think it's really important to make that increased investment. With that sales tax carve off, that was contributing 54.1 million a year to water projects and funds through this bill. And then right now only 35 million in SGF is being dedicated through the Senate position. So I think if we're gonna go with the Senate position, that it makes sense to ask for the 60 million.
We've already kind of carved off that 5 million for technical assistance and 15 million for construction and a little bit hopefully to fill some vacant or empty unfilled positions at KDHE and Division of Water Resources. So from the operations of the Kansas Water Office, we need to go close to that 60 million SGF funds if we're going to take 20 to 25 off of it and leave them in the 35 range to actually do some improvements on what they have. A really great new program called WISE. They have some other initiatives going on, and a lot of the people that came in and testified in front of us wanting 2302 have all it's kind of like anything else. If there's little money out there, there's a lot of people with plans on how they can spend it. And some of them are very valid, and we had some really good testimony. So if we're going to go to a state general fund amount, I think we would like to be in that 60 million range rather than the 35 that we're currently at.
Doesn't want to work, there it goes. She keeps turning this off, no. The thing that I would say as you come up to this kind of number, remember our numbers were the same to start with. So your system was kind of on the low side for this 5 years. So as we both know that this needs to be done, thing that I'm concerned about is with the 35, they need a little time to gear up. We're throwing a lot of money at them all at once. And this is taxpayer money, and I'd kind of like to see how a year with 35 million does and see where we go with that. I could be with you on the 60 on the back end. I'm sitting here saying, do we do like 35, 45, build it up to the 60 or something is kind of what I'm thinking. So I'm coming your direction. It's just I hate to throw 60 all at once on all of them. So that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been studying the KWO budget and the water plan budget pretty closely the last 3 years. And so I really want to advocate for the 60 million. I've spent a lot of time going to the Water Authority meetings, and the Water Authority is the group that takes the input of the regional advisory councils and takes that local input and develops their recommendation for the water plan budget. And then ultimately that is sent to the governor and then sent to us to make recommendations on. So it's a budget that's driven by local input and local users. And I think that they have developed a lot of really great programs to address some of the key issues outlined in the water vision for the state of Kansas. So if we kind of break down the 60 million, we're still looking at 5 million for the technical grant assistance and then the 15 million per year for the grant projects. And those are really geared towards infrastructure projects, which isn't even really addressed in the water plan. And that's feedback that we've gotten from small municipalities who are having grave concerns about water quality. We saw Pretty Prairie where they had significant nitrate contamination and had to put in a multi-million-dollar reverse osmosis system. So even one small town is, they need millions of dollars in order to come into compliance and have clean drinking water and functional public water supply systems. So, that 20 million right there has a very specific dedicated use to benefit our rural communities and communities across the state to update water infrastructure. So then that would leave, as was said, the 35 million, and that's short. And currently, I believe the water office has a budget of 22 million a year. So it's not much more than what they're spending now. That would have the addition of the fees and fines that they also raise. But I don't feel like the 35 is very much of a significant increase. And when they look at the fully funding of the water vision, which was outlined in that Blue Ribbon Task Force, they said it would take 55 million a year to fully fund the water vision, and that was in 2017 dollars. So we're not even meeting that recommendation of fully funding the water vision when we look at $35 million investment, which is what would be dedicated towards the water plan in our $60 million proposal. So I still think this is short, but I think 60 million is a really great starting point for a group that already has a robust budget process. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you have that 8 million in your numbers too? I mean, we do 35 plus 8. So, yeah, so do we include the 8 million? Do you take the 8 million off the 60, or what are you thinking with the 8 million in there?
I feel like I'm on the wrong side of something here. I'm normally the ultra conservative in the room here. I still am, but I find myself in the awkward position of arguing for a little bit more to invest in the issue of water here in the state of Kansas. I honestly was thinking if we just replaced your 35 million with our 60 million and leave the 8 million in there, that's at 68 million, plus about 12 million that is part of the fee structure and the pesticide and the herbicide taxes and stuff. That gets us right to $80 million. And I realize Colorado's spending over 90. They do that on the first couple of programs they have, and then there's a lot of other things buried within their stuff. North Dakota's spending 162 million a year on water issues. So like I said earlier, we're kind of looking at the start of something, but I think it needs to be worthwhile. And I'm as conservative as anybody here, but I understand there's a point when you invest in things so that you get a good return on it, that you're getting enough benefit from this, and that's what we hope to see happen from the water office. And if it's not, then this needs to be shut down and we go back to what we were doing. But what we have been doing hasn't been working for 40 years, guys.
Thank you. I just wanted to point this out, that the budget, or the estimated, I guess, annual cost for the water office is, I can't read that, $69,320,000. So that's, and we've not even touched that in years.
Mr. Chairman, because of the time, could we have a little time to think about that? And Jack, maybe come after we get off the floor, both of us? Does that sound like something the right thing to do?
We can recess, and what time are we? 1:27. We might see if we can find a room for a little bit later on today and come back and talk about this. I'm sure we need to be on the floor here at 2, and there's a few things to do ahead of time. So we'll try to arrange something and get back in contact with you. Okay? Thank you, guys. I appreciate the work on 2279. Thank you.